This podcast contains potentially adult language, adult themes, definitely drinking, and possibly sexual context. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Drinking with Authors, the podcast. I am your host, Erica Lance. My co-host is Valerie Willis, who's fucking with her video settings and somehow got a corgi to show up. Not even masked out.
I mean, I could keep this going to see if anyone notices throughout the whole video.
Yeah, if they don't notice, they're way more stoned than they should be. Our guest today, this is very cool because our guest is also a co-host, but our guest was the very first person on Drinking with Authors ever in the history of Drinking with Authors, which was the magnificent J.M. Paquette.
Woot woot! Woot woot!
Okay, before we dive into what she's been doing for the last 2+ years since we started recording this ridiculousness, let's talk about what we're drinking. So, unfortunately, I had a kidney stone and had to have surgery. So I am not allowed to be drinking right now per my urologist. Apparently there are rules or guidelines or something. So in the spirit that JM never drinks any alcohol, I am with her in that, and I'm actually drinking Simply Apple, which is apparently supposed to help with kidney stones and stuff. Anyway, whatever. I have to drink just apple juice. No, there's nothing else in it. Although, if I was to put something else in it, it would be from Skunk Brothers Spirits, and I would have put their apple pie brandy in it because it would have been amazing. See, I just did it again. Skunk Brothers Spirits, DWA 10, discount code, apple pie brandy.
Doesn't need to be drunk for this to happen. Just thinking about the alcohol content of those wonderful brandies.
Yes, exactly. So Val, what are you drinking with us today?
In the spirit and to be fair, play fair, because I'm very vulnerable when I drink. Sweet tea is all I'm on today.
You're very vulnerable when you drink. I like that was the problem. Okay, Jam, in true spirit, I'm sure the word is tea, which apparently I'm not allowed to drink anymore either.
I couldn't, you and your kidney boulders. No, I'm drinking chamomile tea in a Jack Skellington mug. So
that sounds amazing.
It's
so Jam, just in case anybody didn't listen to the first podcast because the audio was terrible as we were learning what we were doing, can you tell the listening audience what you read?
What I read or what I write?
Right.
What I write. I read all the things.
Pain medication involved with this entire process, which is also another reason I shouldn't be drinking. So
it's recovering with authors today.
Yeah, recovering with authors here. So tell people what you write.
I write cheesy vampire romance novels, paranormal, romance, urban fantasy, that kind of thing.
Awesome. And I think when last we spoke, you actually were working on book 3 of the Klauden Saga.
Yeah, now that's all done. So that whole trilogy, the trilogy is finished, and there's a book of short stories as well that go along with it called The In-Between. And now I'm finishing up my second series, which is Conjuring Fascination, and it's urban fantasy instead, more modern setting, but still vampires, werewolves, shifters, demons, all the things.
Very, very cool.
So,
and isn't I think the Klauden Saga is coming out in hardback, isn't it? For those that want to.
It is. If you're watching on YouTube, there it is. It's the hardcover version. So book 1 is available in hardcover, and then book 2 is Solin's body, because spoiler, Solin's body becomes important, and then Hannah's heart is the last, the end of their story, if you will.
Very cool. So what have you, you were on pre-pandemic, you were on in-person live when we actually used to record these live and in person.
I even was part back in the very beginning when we met at a bar and started drinking. Well, I hung out with you guys drinking when you were first like, hey, we should just get together and talk about your book. So I was at one of those meetings. And then right after that, like maybe a month later was you, by the time you had all the equipment in your house, and you and Austin interviewed me.
Yes, me and Austin. Austin is one of the amazing co-hosts that was part of the in-person. He doesn't do the video chat well, so he hasn't been part of Drinking with Authors for a number of episodes because of that. But so what have you been up to, Jen? You had a pandemic happen. What are you been doing?
The pandemic is nice to me because I can't go outside a lot because I'm literally allergic to the sun. So
So you're really a
been-
vampire. So you're really
I am-
writing autobiographical stories, right?
right, but with none of the perks. I only have the negative side of the vampire, which is if I spend more than 10 or 15 minutes in the sun, I break out in hives and start itching, and eventually my throat closes. So that's a great time.
That's delightful.
It sounds great, but I did get to tint the windows in my car using my HSA, which was the greatest moment ever. Because it's a medical condition,
believe you.
solar urticaria, for those who want to know. But not leaving my house was really good for me because I got a lot of writing done. I know other people had to leave their house in order to get things done. For me, my house is very calm and quiet, so I get a lot done, and it lets me stay up late because I started teaching online, and it just made my life a lot easier and more conducive to creating. So I've been productive.
You've been productive. Well, let's talk about the Conjuring Fascination series. So let's get some little insights, little tidbits into that.
All right, so this is a book. All right, so I wrote this book a really, really long time ago, the first volume of it, and I wrote it in first person, and I had finished it, and I was like, this is a fun little story about, girl in the city meets a vampire. It was maybe 75,000 words, and it just wasn't wonderful. I was like, this is cool, but maybe I need to start over. And the three of us, plus Vanessa, who is also a co-host, were at a writer's retreat. And I was convincing myself that I needed to start over at the beginning, which is the hardest thing, because you're like, no, I could take what I have and fix it. Of course I could tweak it and make it wonderful. No, Sometimes you just need to keep the idea in your brain and start over. And I sat on the couch with Vanessa while you guys were doing a podcast, and you kept yelling at us because we were loud in the background. And Vanessa was like, hey, so why don't you, she walked me through the beginning. So that entire first chapter takes place, basically you've got a human girl who lives in the city who's had some terrible things happen to her with the supernatural in her youth, but is like recovering. And now she's like, there's no such thing. It was just, I made it up because I got hurt, whatever, trauma. So she gets tickets to go to a show at a place called Viking Times, which was Vanessa's wonderful idea. She was like, medieval times, but with Vikings, because your main character is a Viking. And it was one of those, like, she was supposed to go with her boyfriend, but they broke up. So she ends up at Viking Times alone, and she meets a Viking who ends up being a vampire, and then they have adventures from there. So I had to rewrite the entire thing. It's not in first person anymore, and it's much better for it. Because now I can bounce perspective. So that was the first book. And then I had to go back and I wrote a prequel for it. So that's actually volume 1 is a little short story novella, right? It's not a short story. It's a little baby book called Call Me Forth, which is what happened to her when she was younger. So you get that story. And then I just finished Keep Me Close's book 3. And that's where it all comes together. And I thought I was done, but the more that I've been talking about it with Val a lot, it's not done. And there's so much more to go.
So much more to go. Yeah,
so it's maybe the third installment.
Yes, exactly. No, and I think it's very important to share stories where you have to start from scratch and rewrite a story, because I'm sure everyone here has a story collecting dust from high school or from when they first attempted that has a great story idea, even strong characters, but your writing wasn't there, or you didn't understand how important it was to tell that story in a different perspective. So it's kind of nice to hear that you circled back, made that hard call, and are happy with the end result.
Well, Charles Gannon was talking about that on the show, is that the book he just finished, he's doing a series, but a book that just came out, it was characters he wrote in high school. Like, it was a story he started writing in high school, and he took the characters and the premise and rewrote it. And I think you can do that. Even if a story starts to stall, sometimes you can take it, kind of scatter it out again and go, what should this have been, and
Mhm.
start again. But it is, it is one of the hardest things in the world to go, oh God, I got to redo something,
And it was very tempting to go back and like steal from the original. And that was part of why I said, no, I have to rewrite it in a different person, because then I can't steal it. Like I can't just go back and go, no, this conversation was fine. Just copy and paste that into the new one. Like, no, I read it, the whole thing through once so that I remembered highlights, and then I just closed it and I didn't open it again. So
Oh, wow.
it was hard.
It is. I still have to do one more rewrite, I believe, of Rebirth, which was one of the first novels I wrote and finished in high school. I rewrote it initially and it got 100 times better, and I was happy for it. But now that I've grown so much as a writer, it's one of those things like, would another rewrite do this more justice? And I'm leaning towards that. I'm not. It's definitely an undertaking, but I don't think I've ever heard someone say, yeah, I tried to rewrite it and I hated it. I've never run into a person. If there's a person out there, I would love to hear what the tribulations were behind that. But for the most part, most people, as long as you close that older one and break that bond and start fresh with those initial concepts in place, most people are very happy with their rewrites.
Because
Oh,
every
okay.
time you write something, your writing voice is going to improve, your style will get better. You'll, leave old problems behind and develop new ones. Like there's not a lot of nodding and shrugging in this series, which I was so proud of myself. But she bites her lip constantly, and I'm like, what is happening? Why is everybody biting their lip in this book? So
Just
I'm
sometimes there are
sorry.
habits that are hard to break. You realize that when you're writing in the book that's the case. But you have another series coming up, don't you?
Yeah, my next series is Dragon Shifters, because I discovered a lovely movie, a Russian
Also Vanessa's fault.
Also Vanessa's fault. I mean, she showed us the movie but hadn't seen it yet, and then I watched it. I was like, oh my god, this movie is the best. So the movie's called I Am Dragon, and it's delightful. And it's basically a sweet romance about a dragon, a human dragon, and a princess, essentially. A duchess, if you will. But that story, I just kept thinking about dragon shifters. And then in the Conjuring Fascination, there actually is a dragon shifter mentioned. So that character is like a side character in that book, but he's going to be one of the players in this new series. So the first one, I should know my name. No, Cerise Secrets, that's what it's called. So that one's coming up. I think it's releasing at the end of the year. So
That's really exciting.
Ooh.
So, we always ask other people who are on the show, like, what is your writing process like? So, JM, what is your writing process like?
What's your
I try so hard to outline, and it's just okay. So I'll start right. I start with conversations. I always start with dialogue because that's where a story begins in my brain. So I'll have an idea for a conversation, and then I build characters around that. Who are these people? Why are they saying this thing? And then from there, I build a world and a story. So for me to plot out a story is weird because I'm like, I know at some point they're going to talk about this thing. But where is it going to come up? And then usually I'll start just writing, usually in the middle of that conversation. And then once I've got, 30 pages or so, I can step back and go, okay, now really, where am I? Do I need to back up? Do I need to add more to the beginning of this? And then when I get about halfway, usually that's when I sit back and I'm like, all right, now I need an outline. So I go through all the chapters that I've done so far, and then I write down all the scenes that I think I'm going to write in the future. And then I totally ignore that for the most part, because I'm like, oh, so we're not doing this. I had a whole thing planned for Keep Me Close, the last book of Conjuring Fascination. I had a whole thing planned of how it was going to go. And no, Pilkington was like, no, that's actually not, we're not doing that at all. That thing you wanted. So
yours is very character driven, kind of like Val's.
Yeah.
The characters misbehave all the time, Erica. They don't
Right?
listen to me at all.
No, they don't listen to either one of you. I don't have this problem when I'm writing. Mine is not characters not listening to me. So But so that's cool. How much can you get done at a clip?
It
And
depends.
we're
If
being
it's-
asked these questions because you normally are the one asking the
I
questions.
normally,
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I don't know if I'm not being distracted by late night Netflix now. If I'm really in like writing mode, I've written, what was my max? I think I wrote 8,000 words in like the, an evening, because I write at
Right.
night. I can't write. I'm not a morning person at all. I'm not conscious until coffee, and
I
usually
like how she's looking at me and asking me that question.
it was
Because they
late at
don't
night.
they don't know, Jen, that we meet almost every night for two years now.
And that's how I
And-
get most of my work done. So you
And we
want to
get
work
most of our work
buddy.
done too. We're work buddies. We're
Mhm.
writing
We're
accountability
accountability buddies,
Yes.
which so if
Accountability
you
buddies.
yeah,
Wow.
if you don't, it's like a gym buddy, but we meet on the computer because
Yeah.
for 2 years we didn't leave our home. Yeah, and that accountability planner is a result of us meeting.
Yep. We're
For
like,
it's
let's
we
make a
have a
book
phone
version of
call.
what we do.
Yeah, we do this every night, but well, sometimes we talk and bounce ideas off of each other, or what are you working on tonight? Oh, I'm writing on this, or I'm editing this. So having that standing meeting as a habit really improved my productivity, because what was I doing at night? Like, I read a book before I go to bed always, but what did I do? Like, I hung out, I read, I wasn't always writing every night. And now I'm like, no, it's 8 o'clock or it's 8:30. I need to be on the computer because I need to get some writing done.
No, I think that's great. Accountability is huge in being able to write. So you've also done a ton of editing, haven't you?
I have, because I'm the lead editor for Four Horsemen Publications. So, oh my God.
You've had tons of workshops.
Yeah, I've done workshops, presentations on editing. I edit a lot now. I'm faster because I do it way more often than I did. I've always been editing, like, 20 years of editing. I've been doing dissertations and occasionally novels, memoirs. People will just show up and be like, hey, could you edit this for me? I'm like, yeah, whatever. But I did mostly academic stuff. Now in the last 2 years, I've done more creative writing than in all the dissertations that I did in like 10 years before this. So it's pretty crazy, because we're at what, 55, 60 books, something like that, not including
It was over 60 books in the first year. I think
Yeah.
we're over 250 plus books and 40 plus authors now.
Yeah. So
going
now
into year three.
I edit my authors. Like, I have a series of authors whose work that I will go through, and then I quality control everything else. So I read all the books that Four Horsemen puts out. So I've been reading a lot, which is fun.
Have you discovered any new genres that you didn't expect that you would enjoy?
I read fantasy primarily. I read romance, mostly paranormal, urban fantasy. That's my jam. But I've read a lot more science fiction than I have in the past, because most of the science fiction I've read has had a romance slant, because that's what I enjoy. Like, all right, I read my William Gibson, I read Neuromancer, and John Walter Williams. Like, I read my standards in science fiction, but if I were going to pick up today a science fiction book, I would pick up a romance, because that's what I like. I like watching people fall in love and have a happy ending. But reading for Four Horsemen, I've been reading more science fiction books that aren't romances. So that's been really interesting. And one thing that's really cool now that we're so far into it is I'm seeing like books 2, 3, and 4 from authors when I saw their submission at the very beginning, and just watching the growth that happens by the time like you hit your third book. You really, like, you've nailed your voice, where your story is going. It just gets better and better.
Well, that's good. What advice would you give on that?
Oh, just keep writing. All right, keep writing. Try and write every day. I know that's like a standard Stephen King thing, right? Find a time of day that works for you and stick with it. Like, make it a habit, because I'm super lazy and unmotivated. It's very easy for me to be like, no, I don't need to do the thing. So before the pandemic, when I had to leave my house, a friend of mine I've always had accountability games because, like I said, I'm super lazy. So the deal that we made with one another was if I didn't write every day, I had to take the stairs at work. And my office at work is on the 3rd floor. And I do not want to walk up 3 flights of stairs every day. So I am punishment motivated. And that used to help. But then I didn't have to leave my house. So I was like, well, there's no stairs in my house. So it doesn't matter if I don't write every day. So having the accountability and making it into a habit was really helpful. The other thing is to let it go, which, speaking of having to start that book over, sometimes you hit book 3 and you go back and read book 1 and you're like, oh my God, so many mistakes. Did I really do this or do that? Like, no, just let it go. It's out in the wild. It's doing its own thing. Move on to new things. So you can't stick with your one baby book and make it perfect, because by the time it's perfect and then you start over, you're going to find more things. Like, it's never going to be perfect. It's just, stuff's never done. It's just due.
One of the cool things that Anne Rice ever said, because for a while there she did Facebook videos and talks, is that she talked about, yes, could have I written an interview with a vampire better? Now, yes. But when I look at those old books, I don't feel the urge to fix them, because as the writer I was at the time I wrote it, I did the best I could possibly do at that time with what I knew.
It's like going back and trying to add a cell phone into like Buffy the Vampire Slayer for, when you go back years later, you're different. The world is different. So you just have to say, no, that book is a product of you at that time. And you learn from it and you apply those lessons to the next book that you're working on, because otherwise you just get stuck.
No, I agree. I didn't get stuck. Do you think I got stuck? Oh, no, you get stuck. Okay.
Yeah, like you get stuck on the book.
No, that's fine. It's okay. Pain medication is fun. I would say, though, I think your analogy is perfect, because I think me and you talked about that. I rewatched all of Buffy and I'm like, if these fuckers had a cell phone, this show would have been over.
It would have been, that's it, done.
They spent most of that show going to look for each other. Like, you don't realize it until you rewatch the show and you're like, every fucking episode, they're like, have you seen Spike? No. I'll go look for
get
him.
so and so. Like, she wouldn't have killed Angel because
Angel would have been dead by now.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but it's a product of its time. So you just have to accept it for what it is in that window through that lens.
No, I agree 100%. Okay, guess what? We have to take a break. We'll be right back with Drinking with Authors.
Sample locally sourced, quality distilled spirits in the beautiful Columbia River Gorge. At Skunk Brothers Distillery, we're family owned, brewing small batch grain to bottle spirits, just like our grandfather did back in the Prohibition era. From handcrafted bourbons and moonshine to flavored blends and cordials infused with local fruit. Join us for a tasting tour and buy Skunk Brothers spirits straight from the source.
It's all in the family at Skunk Brothers Spirits, located in Stevenson, Washington.
Okay, we're back, and Val apparently can't have her hair down without feverishly stop touching it. Stop touching it.
Touch it. It's touching me.
I don't know how people do it with their hair always like half on their face. My skin like crawls just thinking about it. I always want to pull my hair back.
But there's always that romance scene. But it's the hair in the face is important for a romance because it's an excuse to touch the other's face.
That was the other thing in my book. Everybody, she was biting, there was biting lips and touching of chins. I was like, leave her poor chin alone.
There's a callus there.
You don't need to touching her chin.
What movie is it where he's like, it's Zombieland, where he's like, there's a little hair that needs to be tucked there. And he's like throughout the whole movie wanting to tuck hair behind a girl's ear. And then she tries to eat his face off because that's what should happen in most of these. Yeah. So one thing a lot of people may know about you from listening to the podcast, or may not, who the fuck knows, is that you are a happy ending kind of person.
I am very angry when you kill main characters in stories. And if they don't end up together, I am really angry. looking at R.A. Salvatore, just saying. No.
Okay, so I think we should tell this R.A. Salvatore story because it goes into you meeting R.A. Salvatore. So let's
I
discuss.
was nice. Okay, so I read an R.A. Salvatore book many a moon ago, and I love R.A. Salvatore. Like Drizzt Do'Urden is one of my favorite. I'm sorry, do you say Drizzt? I always say Drizzt, and I know that the audiobooks go back and forth, but whatever. Drizzt in my brain. So I read all of those, and I really liked it. So I was like, all right, I'll read his other series, and he has another series, and I'm not going to name it, but there is a moment where there's a character, and you assume he is the main character, and he like falls off a roof and the bad guy comes along and gangs him on the ground. And then the story was about the other character. And I was like, whoa. No, you don't do that to me. So I'm the person when I buy a new book, like if I'm at a bookstore, I read the last page to make sure that both names are there. Because if they're not, I feel cheated and I'm not going to read it. I'm sorry. There's like enough tragedy and death in the world. I want happy endings. I want it to work out in the fiction that I read. This is because I have a literature degree, so I read so many stories that were sad and depressing because literature is all about death. If it's not about death, it's about sex, which is another discussion. But if I don't know, if I'm reading a story, I want it to work out in the end. I want it to be happy.
And you got to meet
And
R.A. Salvatore.
I was going, so yeah, thank you. COVID ruined my memory. I appreciate it.
I know. Continue.
So I got to meet R.A. Salvatore many years later at a book signing, and part of me was like, you killed O'Brien and I'll never forgive you for it. But I didn't say that, and he told me all about the new book that he was working on, and he was very excited and super nice. So I enjoy R.A. Salvatore, but I haven't forgiven him.
Unlike some people who will directly approach the authors about issues that they have in their story, that might be me. Anyway, moving on.
Wound, like Laurel K. Hamilton and The Wound. But
Anyway, so I think that's fascinating. You're gonna write a dragon shifter romance, right?
Mhm.
Is there any genres that you want to put your little toes into that you haven't yet?
I have other I live in paranormal romance land. That's what I like to read, so that's what I like to write. So I may vary up my creatures and expand my world. Like the Dragon series is actually a multiverse that's connected to other things. I do have another idea for a series, a book, of course, that I wrote when I was in high school, that I still remember the characters, based on a D&D game. It was before I met Erica and started gaming with her, which is how we met, listening audience.
Yes,
many years ago. It was through
we were
D&D.
nerds. Yes,
we are nerds.
We are nerds.
The game that I was in, the campaign that I was in before her, had these characters that I had started playing in high school, and I wrote an entire like medieval story about it was a paladin named Lenore, and Escher the mage was another person in our group, and they were always bickering back and forth, and then it was the adventures that they had. And I wrote a whole series, like a series of stories, and then one basically novel about it, but it's so rough, so I would need to go back and revisit. So I'm guessing that's more like Clauden's Ring. It's more D&D medieval world fantasy based than the more modern stuff. So
I believe we use the term high fantasy when we're
high
referring to
fantasy,
those.
high fantasy, yes, but
Very
no, not a lot of
Tolkien-esque.
political stuff, because I get bored with political stuff.
But you are an avid Tolkien fan.
Well, yeah, I love the Tolkien in my soul.
So I don't think we've ever explored that part of you. So you're a PhD in English literature. Some people might not realize that.
I went all the way.
You did. You went the full Monty as far as that goes, which does not mean she took her clothes off. She didn't do that. So don't bother asking if you're listening. But you teach Tolkien. So let's talk about where your Tolkien obsession came from, my friend.
Well, I read it when I was younger, and I enjoyed it. And then from there, as many people do, you use Tolkien as a springboard, and then you read the rest of fantasy. So from there, I found Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickman. I read all the Dragonlance books. David Eadings, Peter S. Beagle, like you kind of wander all around and you find all the other people who do the things that Tolkien did. But because I went to college and I studied English, my interest was in medieval literature, like, the Middle English stuff with all the knights and the damsels in distress, which is stuff that Tolkien liked. But Tolkien's true love was Beowulf and like Norse sagas. So I got into that. I actually learned Old English, which is a useful skill in today's world.
Right.
Not at all. That is like the opposite.
I often go, Jen, I need you to look at my Old English, my oracle prophetical moment in this book. Did I write it right?
It helps a little bit because like my background is, I ended up going linguistics. That's the track that I took through literature. So my PhD is in literature with a specialization in Old English and linguistics. So I look at where words came from. Latin would have helped me a lot more, but I took Greek because like I said, I'm lazy. Yeah. So when I was an undergrad, Latin was 4 days a week to drive to USF because I was a commuter, and Greek was 2 days a week. And I was like, Greek it is. So because I did not want to fight for parking. So I took Greek, which helps a little bit, with fancier words, but our language has German. I should have taken German because that's where English comes from. But I took a bunch of classes on Old English. We had to translate Beowulf. I still can recite it. It's one of the things I do when I give my history of the English language spiel to my students, but it's all stuff that Tolkien would have known. Now he knew a lot more than I do. Like I dabble, I feel like, and he was a philologist, like through and through, worked on the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. His word was use, by the way, that he looked up. It is 16 pages with 4 columns on each page of all of the the uses of the word use in the English language from the beginning, how it was used and in what context. So if you've ever wondered, like, where does this word come from in English? When did it start meaning this thing? Look it up in the OED. If you have a school account, your library has a subscription and it's free. Otherwise you have to pay for it. It's more money. And if you're lucky enough for your library to have a copy, it is a bookcase and a half of books that have all of our words and where they came from and what they mean. So I love Tolkien. And then I went to graduate school and I had to write a thesis. And I was like, hey, how about I write a thesis about Tolkien? And my professor was like, that's cute. Fantasy, why fantasy is not, that's what you read for fun, that's not worth study. So I had to do like a whole presentation. I had to create, for those of you, I had to write an annotated bib that explained why fantasy was a viable genre. And eventually it went through and it got approved, and I wrote my thesis on the power of the storyteller in Tolkien, because it's a world where there's no technology. So how do you get news? Well, people show up and they tell you, and whether you believe them is how you learn things. So throughout the story, Gandalf shows up, and at one point he gets to Edoras, and Grima Wormtongue is the person who says to him, we call you Gandalf Stormcrow because every time you show up here, you come with bad news. And it's like, yeah, he's not wrong. Gandalf does always show up with bad news. So do you trust this guy who shows up and is like, war is coming? And you're like, I don't know about that. You're the only one here who seems to think so. So I wrote all about that, and that was fun. And then I was done with school, so done, never going back. And then a professor of mine was like, hey, so I'm teaching a class on Tolkien next semester. I didn't know if maybe you wanted to take it. And I was like, oh, come on, I'll just go back for just one class. So I went back for a class, and at the time, I'm going to tell this story now. At the time I was adjuncting, which is when you teach a class as a contract faculty. I was adjuncting everywhere because they don't pay you a lot and you don't get any benefits. It's not a very good racket, but I did it for a very long time. Anyway, so I was adjuncting at a place called HCC. And while I was there, I was in the office, which you shared with a ton of other people. And one of the people in there was a guy named Christopher Tidwell, and he taught English. He was an adjunct in the next year after he ended up getting full-time. And then eventually I got full-time there. And I told him this story. I was like, years ago, you and I were alone in the adjunct office. We were, we were just sitting in there, and I was telling him, right. So I said, oh, it's not interesting yet.
Well, no, you're alone in an adjunct office. I'm wondering if he's going to turn into a werewolf with all the paranormal romance. Continue. This could get good.
No, we were just sitting there. It was perfectly professional. Anyway, it was, except Chris Tidwell was deaf in one ear. So he shouted. So everything that he said, everyone in the hall could hear. So I told him, I was like, hey, I'm done with school. I have my master's. I don't ever need to go back. I'm so over like that life. And but I'm going to go back and I'm going to take one class and then that's it. I'm just back because it's Tolkien and I love it. And he stood up, kicked the door shut, and I was like, what the fuck is happening? And he was like, no, you're going back to school. You're going back to school full time. And he talked to me for an hour in the office. And by the end of that conversation, I went home and I filled out my application and I applied for the PhD program and I got in. And then years later, when I met him again, I was like, hey, just so you know, you're the reason I went to grad school. And he always used to call me his starfish because Chris Tidwell is dead now, for those of you who are listening. He ended up dying of cancer a few years ago. He was very young and it was very sad. But I'm glad that I got to know him like while we were both full-time at the same place. But he would always say, hey, you're my starfish. You're the one that I threw back. Because there's that story about the guy walking on the beach and there's all this starfish and it's like, oh, they're all going to die. And he picks one up and he throws it back in the ocean. And they're like, but it doesn't matter. You can't affect, everything. And he said, well, it matters to that one that I just threw back in the water. That one is going to be all right. So whenever I saw him, he'd be like, starfish, very loudly down the hallway. But anyway, so I went back to school and I did all my classes and then I had to write a dissertation and I was like, hey, you remember that whole Tolkien thing I wanted to do? And they were like, yeah, that's cute. Prove it to us. Why is fantasy viable? And this was 3 years later. So for those of you understand, I had to redo all my research because the ones from 3 years ago weren't good anymore. So you have to re-find all the new sources, what's been going on for the last 3 years, blah, blah, blah. And I did that. And I ended up focusing on Stephen King, which was a whole other ballpark. But
So
I talked about
another really easy genre to talk everybody into. You're like, you know what? I'm not going to do fantasy. I know where everybody's going to be on board. I'm going to do horror because
I'm going to do horror.
That's just as viable.
Which was like I literally have a chapter called Horror, the Red-Headed Stepchild of Literature. So I had to justify that. And then I connected Stephen King and Tolkien in my dissertation, which got published as a book and you can find it on Amazon, just saying.
Yes, I own a copy of this book because as a good friend, I needed to spend like $80 on this book because
I appreciate you. It's an academic book.
It is an academic book. It's very expensive academic book. On the stand.
I have very little say on it. But
so
that's my Tolkien.
Yeah, but you read well, first of all, you've read the Silmarillion a lot, which a lot of people who like Tolkien actually haven't read the Silmarillion.
Yeah, it's up there. I love the Silmarillion. You have to get past the idea that it reads like the Bible, but I mean, I read everything, so I've read the Bible, but it's very uneven. Like parts of it are super detailed and parts of it are really vague. So you'll skip huge chunks of time will go by, and then you'll get like a really detailed description of a certain area. But part of that is because the Silmarillion is a book that Tolkien worked on his entire life. And he didn't publish it, but he died first. And then his son came along and who was like the Christopher Tolkien, takes all of Tolkien's stuff. He deals with the estate. He just died a couple years ago. But anyway, he took all of the stories and he put them together in a book, but he didn't really footnote it. So scholarly, the Silmarillion is problematic because people looked at it and they're like, all right, well, how much of this is your dad and how much of this is you? So after the Silmarillion was published as a book, also it was the book that Tolkien wanted to publish after The Hobbit. He was like, hey, I have a successful, book that came out that you actually had your son read, and he's the one who recommended it to you. So to Stanley Unwin, who was his publisher at the time. And they were like, all right, well, what else do you have? And he was like, hey, I have the Silmarillion. And they were like, that's cute, try again. So he was like, all right, I guess I have the Lord of the Rings. And then they made him break it into 3 volumes. And he was very angry about that. That's another story. Anyway, so the Silmarillion came out and then there was pushback because people were like, we can't tell, what if this is yours? Like, what did you smooth out? What did you patch together? What did you add? So after that, he published the 13 volumes of the history of Middle Earth. And that's all of his father's notes. So you can see like how Fellowship, it started like this, and then it was rewritten like this, and then it's crossed out in red pencil, and the word this is written above it. So it's super detailed, like the story of how Lord of the Rings was written, and then other stuff. There's a bunch of other things in there.
Have you read that?
I have, and I'm a crazy person because I read it all the way through. You're not supposed to read. It's like reading the dictionary. You're not supposed to just read it. It's meant for like a resource. You go through and you say, oh, well, when was the first time that the ring was mentioned? Okay, well, let's go into Morgoth's ring and look at all of the iterations. I read them all though.
But that's why we love you, Jen. That's
not why we love her. Oh, Val, for anybody watching this on video is going to notice that your hair went up. What happened?
I couldn't take it anymore. I could not take it anymore.
Oh my goodness. So it's interesting because you say paranormal romance, blah, 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 but you have read probably most, if not all, of Stephen King.
Yes, I have.
That is not, for the record, paranormal romance.
No, but I read Stephen King when I was younger. Like he was my first, all right. So my aunt gave me a copy of the Tommyknockers for my 4th birthday, which was probably wildly inappropriate now that I'm older and think about it, but it introduced me to this whole new genre. And I grew up in a house where there were always books and I was able to read whatever I wanted. Like if there was a book around, it was fair game. So I started reading all of Stephen King, but I also always read fantasy. I did read Game of Thrones. It was not my favorite. It's super political and everyone dies. It's just not my jam.
He kills a lot of people.
And it's just, I want people to live in my books. I don't want them to die.
Which is surprising because Stephen King also kills a lot of people.
He does. But my favorite book in the world is still The Talisman, but it has a happy ending. So, it all works out, even though he killed Wolf, which was the saddest thing ever. But
and that's funny because for J.R. Martin, there's an interview, I think it was the PBS, The Great American Novel, where he talks about the reason why he kills off characters is because when he was reading Lord of the Rings and Gandalf falls down the crevice, like he's like, I couldn't read for months. Like he's like, it rattled me and I never lost that. He says, so when I wrote Game of Thrones, I wanted to keep rattling my readers in that same way that I had experienced as a kid when reading Tolkien. So it's kind of funny.
I think I actually liked Game of Thrones. I'm a fan of it, but I also love to know that he's a pantser. And I think he just forgot some things. So it's easier to kill off people than have to remember necessarily all of that.
That's very true.
He says, if you have to remember all the characters, way easier to fucking kill them off. Like done. And you could tell who his favorites were. It's very interesting. Do you think that you have who's your favorite character in Lord of the Rings? That Tolkien.
Me, I love Faramir.
Val. I could give a flying fuck. This isn't Val's interview.
Oh, I want to know what Val says. I love Faramir because he is the most honorable character in the story. A close second is Pippin. I love Pippin because he's like a walking eucatastrophe. He just shows up and he wrecks things. But Tolkien made up this word eucatastrophe for like the good, bad thing, which Tolkien's super Catholic. So his definition for it, or his first example of it, would be the crucifixion. Seems like it's bad, but it's actually good. Spoiler alert, the end of Lord of the Rings, Gollum takes the ring. Seems like it's bad, but it's actually good. So that moment where you are convinced that the worst possible thing is about to happen, but then it shifts, you end up with the happy ending. So that's a catastrophe. Pippin causes them constantly. He takes the Palantir, he makes noise in Moria, like he just pushes the plot along with bad things that end up being good things. But and I love him for that. But really, Faramir is the most noble character, not just in Tolkien, but like in fantasy. He, for a little while, like fought with Drizzt in my brain for like the hero on a pedestal spot, because he's such a good man.
Okay, Val, just because Jam wants to know, what's your favorite character in Lord of the Rings?
Man, I have a hard time because if it's from the main cast, it has to be Sam. the idea of that faithful
Yeah.
friend,
Mhm.
I value a very strong supporting or secondary character in any writing. Like the best friend of the main character is usually ends up being my favorite character no matter what I read. And Sam is a
Weird.
great
Mhm.
aspect. No, what? Yet, what is yours, Erica?
No, first of all, that's not surprising at all to me.
Hers is Sauron,
Yeah.
Hands down.
the
No,
bad
The
guy.
villain. The villain.
It's interesting. There, to me, okay, I'm just gonna, Jen already knows this. There's a lot of fucking walking in those books. There's so much fucking walking. And I am not a huge fan of books that get too drawn out like that. I'm just not. Not that it's not amazing and everything like that, but man, I was fucking happy when those movies shortened that shit up. Like, let's
Well, that's
Try
because
not on it.
Tolkien loves he loves nature, he loves trees. He grew up in a place where when he was a child there were trees everywhere, and by the time he was a young man, industrialization had happened, and a lot of the trees, the parks that he had walked around in, were gone, and it was all buildings and industry, factories. So he spends a lot of time on trees. And this is my favorite Tolkien story, that Tom Shippey, I got to go to a lunch at with Tom Shippey when I was a visiting professor at USF, and it was awesome. For those of you who aren't familiar, Tom Shippey is the leading Tolkien scholar right now. Helped on the movies, he's written the biography. Tom Shippey's the man. Anyway, so he tells a story about how when he was younger, he was at Oxford to interview Tolkien, who was a rock star, but not in the way that he is today. Like, Tolkien, Tom Shippey is very old. And he was like 30 at the time. So he tells the story of how he showed up to Oxford early and he sat down on a bench next to an old man, not knowing who it was. And the old man started talking to him and was like, hey, do you see this tree? This tree has been next to this bench for, however long, and none of the people walking by even notice it. This tree probably has a name. It has a history. And he was like, okay, tree hugger dude, like, thanks for letting me know that you really appreciate the trees on campus. I have a meeting. So he got up, and then later on, of course, he goes to the office, and that's Tolkien. And he was like, oh, okay, you love trees, which is why even the trees walk in his books. But he's trying to recapture that idea, of the nature, the pastoral, that, nature like heals you or soothes you. But then he also isn't super romantic about it, because our poor hobbits are always like, nature sucks, and I hate sleeping on the ground, and all I want is my bed and a cup of tea. So,
which is your motto in life. I know why you like these so much.
I'm a hobbit.
But she was talking about being on a meeting with her One Ring campaign character name on her Zoom call.
I went halfway through a meeting with Tilda at the bottom, and I was like, who's Tilda? That's so funny. Oh my God, that's me. So yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
Not so much attention to detail.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we have to wrap up this podcast because we have to. We can talk for hours. We know this. We've done it. What I need from you, my friend, is advice that you would give. Not you, Val. I have zero interest in your help on this whatsoever.
Yeah, oh, worked up. Like, I'm listening. Look, I'm being a good girl, Erica.
Yeah, wonder
like,
why you like the sidekick hero support characters.
We just got in trouble by mom.
Because
over
that's
here.
who I am in the
Yes,
real life.
I know. That's exactly what it is. That hurts your face. Anyway.
Advice.
What advice.
All right, my advice is to, well, I already gave advice, which was write every day and have an accountability buddy. But my other advice is to write your story no matter how unoriginal you think it is. Because I teach a class on Lord of the Rings, and I'll have people who say, I wrote a book, but it's fantasy. Like, is there anything new in fantasy? Like, yeah, there is, but it doesn't matter how derivative your work is, because you haven't told that story. So you, as being yourself, you're the only you there is. So you're going to tell that story in a way that no one else could. So do it. It's still worthwhile. Your voice is worthwhile.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so what is your next book coming out? Let's replay it here.
Keep Me Close should be out by the time this podcast plays. So that is the third novel in the Conjuring Fascination trilogy. And then my next book is going to be Cerise Secrets, which is my Dragon Shifter series coming out at the end of this year.
Very cool. And I believe Klauden's Ring is coming out on audiobook too here shortly.
Yes. Awesome.
So
Yay.
that's super exciting. Okay, cool. Well, guys, this has been Drinking with Authors. I have been your
Thank
host,
you.
Erica Lance. My amazing yet fraught with anxiety over her hair co-host has been Valerie Willis. She's an amazing sidekick,
I've
just
been
in
the
case
Sam.
anybody's wondering.
The best Sam.
The best Sam ever. And our guest has been J.M. Paquette, which is thoroughly awesome. Our sponsor today has been Skunk Brothers Spirits, DWA 10. Check them out. Like I said, if I didn't have to behave myself and not drink alcohol right now, I would have put some of that apple pie brandy into my apple juice. It is amazing. Done it with apple cider too, just as a hit. And we will see you guys next time. Oh, wait, you didn't do your social media.
Yeah, shameless plug. Go. Where can they find you?
AuthorJMPaquette.com is my website. I'm on Twitter at AuthorJMP, and then I also have editor JMP13 for tweet, and I'm on Instagram as well.
Very, very cool. Well, now we've officially been Drinking with Authors, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you.